You really thought divorce would make you feel free? Caleb said, staring at the empty space beside him like it had personally betrayed him. The words had barely left his mouth when the first burst of fireworks cracked over the city, bright and cheerful in the sky. While down at the hotel rooftop, everything inside him felt strangely off. It was Independence Day in Chicago, and Caleb Sterling had spent the last 3 hours acting like a man who had finally won his life back. He had laughed too loudly, clinked glasses too hard, and told anyone who would listen that sometimes walking away from a marriage was the smartest thing a man could do. He even said it with a smile, like he was proud of it. Maya was holding me back, he told his friend Trent, loosening his tie as he looked out over the river. I just needed my own space again. Trent lifted his drink and gave a low whistle. That sounds like you, man. Clean break. Fresh start. Caleb nodded, trying to believe it himself. That was the whole point of tonight. No guilt. No old arguments. No quiet dinners that felt like duty. No Maya. He was supposed to feel lighter. Instead, there was this annoying pressure in his chest, like something unfinished was waiting to catch up with him. Across the rooftop, couples were taking photos in front of the red, white, and blue decorations. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of cocktails and passed appetizers. The whole place smelled like expensive cologne, grilled steak, and lake air. Caleb should have felt on top of the world. He had the new apartment, the new car, the freedom he kept telling himself he had wanted. So why did the silence in his pocket feel louder than the music? His phone had been quiet for hours. No texts from Maya. No missed calls. No frustrated voicemail. That should have been a relief. Instead, it made him uneasy in a way he could not explain. Maya had always been there, even when he did not deserve it. She had been the one who remembered his work deadlines, who packed his lunch when he forgot to eat, who sat through the bad years with a patience he had started taking for granted. And then one day, she had stopped asking him to come home. That had been the first thing that scared him. Not the divorce. Not even the papers. It was the calm. The way she had looked at him the last time they spoke. Like she had already stepped out of his reach and was only waiting for her body to catch up. Caleb took a slow sip of his drink and glanced toward the elevator doors. People were still arriving, laughing, greeting each other, their voices rising and falling under the music. Then he heard someone nearby say, "Wait, is that Maya?" Caleb went still. His hand tightened around the glass. Because if Maya was really here tonight, then this was no longer just a celebration of his new life. It was the first crack in the version of the story he had been telling himself. The voice came again, quieter this time, but it hit Caleb harder than the fireworks overhead. "Yeah, that is Maya." Caleb turned so fast he nearly spilled his drink, and for a second he thought his own eyes had to be playing tricks on him. At the edge of the rooftop crowd, near the glass railing that looked out over the river, Maya stood in a simple navy dress that fit her in a way that looked effortless, not dressed up for attention, not trying to prove anything, just present. That was what made it worse. She was not dressed like someone coming to start a scene. She looked like someone who no longer needed one. Caleb felt his throat tighten. "What is she doing here?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Trent gave him a sideways look. "You invited half the city to show off your fresh start, man. Maybe she heard about it." Caleb let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. She would not come here. But even as he said it, he knew how little control he actually had over that kind of thing now. Maya was not his wife anymore. She did not answer to his opinions, his moods, or his idea of what made sense. That should have been obvious. Somehow, it still caught him off guard. He watched her from across the roof, trying not to look like he was staring, but failing badly. She was talking to a woman he did not recognize, smiling once, politely, then glancing out over the city like she belonged there more than he did. That was the part that bothered him most. Not anger, not sadness, just the strange, irritating truth that she looked calm. Completely calm. Caleb took another sip of his drink, but it did not settle anything. It only made the bitter taste in his mouth worse. A few months ago, Maya would have stood close to him in a room like this, quietly making sure he was comfortable, quietly reading the room for him, quietly carrying the emotional weight so he would never have to. He had gotten used to that version of her. Maybe too used to it. Now she was across from him, standing on her own, and the space between them felt bigger than the entire rooftop. Trent leaned closer and lowered his voice. "You okay?" Caleb blinked and forced his face into something neutral. "Yeah, of course." But he was not okay, And the worst part was that he did not even know why it bothered him this much. It was not like he still loved her. At least that was what he kept telling himself. This was supposed to be the night he stopped looking back. The night he proved to himself that leaving had been the right move. Instead, the second Maya appeared, he could feel every part of that story start to wobble. She finally turned slightly, and for one brief second their eyes met across the crowd. Caleb felt it like a shock through his chest. No smile. No wave. Just one steady look that said more than 100 arguments ever had. Then she looked away, as if he were no longer worth her time. Caleb stood there, frozen in the noise and the lights, with the fireworks bursting over the river like celebration and warning all at once. And in that moment, he had the sudden, ugly feeling that the night was no longer about him at all. Caleb did not move at first. He just stood there with the fireworks lighting up the river and Maya standing across the rooftop like she had every right to be there. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice. A sharp little vibration that pulled him back into his body. He looked down out of habit. One text from his sister, "Lauren, are you serious right now?" Then another, "Do not make this worse." Caleb frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" he whispered. Before he could even think about answering, he looked up and saw Maya turning toward the private lounge at the far end of the rooftop, the one separated from the rest of the party by a row of tall glass panels and a velvet rope. She was not alone anymore. A man in a charcoal suit had stepped beside her, older, steady, the kind of person who did not waste words. He said something to her, and Maya gave a small nod, calm as anything. Caleb felt that same ugly pressure in his chest again. "Who is she with?" he asked Trent. Trent squinted across the crowd. "No idea. But whoever that is, he looks like he belongs here." Caleb let out a short breath through his nose. Everybody belongs here tonight. But even as he said it, he knew he sounded defensive. That was not what bothered him. What bothered him was the look on Maya's face. Not soft. Not sad. Not the face of someone who had come to check on a man she once loved. She looked focused, like she had a purpose. That made Caleb feel strangely exposed, as if he had walked into a room wearing the wrong clothes. He set his glass down on a high-top table and started toward the lounge before he had time to talk himself out of it. A few guests shifted out of his way, laughing, talking, holding plates of food that suddenly seemed too loud, too ordinary. Maya was still inside the glassed-off area when he reached the rope. The man in the charcoal suit was now speaking to a woman from the event staff, handing her a folded card. Caleb stopped just outside the barrier and watched, trying to make sense of whatever was happening. Then Maya turned and saw him. There was no surprise on her face. That was the worst part. She did not look startled to see him. She looked like she had expected him to come over eventually. "Caleb," she said, her voice even. "You look like you have seen a ghost." He swallowed. "What are you doing here?" Maya tilted her head a little, as if the question was almost funny. "I was invited." "By who?" he asked too quickly. She looked at him for a second, then glanced past him at the crowd of people watching with badly hidden curiosity. "Does it matter?" Caleb hated how small that made him feel. "It does when you show up at my event like this." Maya's expression did not change, but something colder settled into her eyes. "Your event?" she repeated. "You really still talk like that?" The man beside her cleared his throat lightly, but he did not interrupt. Caleb caught the way he stood near her, not possessive, not flashy, just present. That annoyed him even more. "I am not trying to start anything," Caleb said, though his voice had already sharpened. "Then do not," Maya replied. "I did not come here for you." The words landed clean and hard. Caleb felt them more than he understood them. A laugh rose from somewhere behind him, and he realized people were definitely watching now. He glanced over his shoulder and saw a few familiar faces pretending not to stare. Great. Just great. Maya folded her hands loosely in front of her and looked at him the way people look at a man who has just taken too long to catch up. "You should probably get back to your guests," she said quietly. "I am sure they are waiting for the next speech." Then she turned away from him, calm as ever, and that was when Caleb understood something he was not ready to name yet. Maya had not come back to fight. She had come back because she no longer needed to run. The next voice Caleb heard was not Maya's. It was a woman from the event staff, standing a few feet away with a tablet in her hand and a nervous smile that did not quite hide her discomfort. "Mr. Sterling, there is a small issue with the private lounge reservation," she said. Caleb frowned. "What issue?" She glanced at Maya, then back at him. The section was not booked under your name. Caleb blinked, sure he had misheard her. Of course it was. I reserved the rooftop package 2 weeks ago. The woman checked her screen again, then lowered her voice. I am sorry, sir. The reservation was made through another account. Caleb felt heat rise in his neck. Around them, the crowd had gone quieter in that way people do when they can sense something awkward is about to get worse. He looked at Maya, expecting her to react, to at least look uncomfortable, but she just stood there with that same calm expression, the kind that made him feel like he was the only one losing his balance. Whose account? He asked. The staff woman hesitated, then pointed gently toward the man in the charcoal suit. His. Caleb looked at the man again. He was not smiling. He was not trying to impress anyone. He just stood beside Maya, like this entire conversation was beneath him. Caleb gave a short, irritated laugh. So what is this supposed to be? Some kind of joke? Maya finally spoke, her voice steady and low. No, Caleb. It is supposed to be a night where people do not confuse ownership with importance. That hit harder than if she had shouted. Caleb's jaw tightened. I never said that. Maya raised one eyebrow. You did not have to. The silence that followed was worse than an argument. It stretched across the glass lounge, across the music, across the guests pretending not to listen. Caleb could feel eyes on him from every direction. He hated that feeling. He hated that Maya, of all people, was the reason he suddenly felt like a man being quietly corrected in public. You could have told me you were coming, he said, trying to get his footing back. Would it have made a difference? She asked. Be honest. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because the truth was, no. It would have made him angry, defensive, maybe even frantic, but it would not have changed the fact that she was here now, and he had no idea what she wanted. The man beside her handed the tablet back to the staff woman and said, Please make sure the rest of the guests are taken care of. His voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice people listened to without thinking about it. Caleb noticed that. Of course he noticed it. He hated himself a little for noticing it. Who exactly are you? Caleb asked, trying to sound casual and failing. The man looked at him for a beat before answering. Someone who was invited to support Maya. Just like that. No drama. No explanation. No effort to show off. Caleb suddenly felt ridiculous. Maya turned back toward him, and for the first time that night, he saw something in her face that made his stomach twist. Not anger. Not bitterness. Confidence. Quiet, full-bodied confidence. The kind that came from knowing she no longer needed his approval for anything at all. You should go back to your speech, she said softly. People are waiting. Caleb stood there, unable to move, while the room slowly returned to its normal noise around him. But nothing felt normal anymore. Because in one short conversation, Maya had done something he had never expected. She had made him feel like a guest in the life he thought he still controlled. Caleb tried to recover the moment the way he always did, by forcing a smile and pretending nothing had happened. He straightened his tie, lifted his chin, and walked back toward the center of the rooftop where a small crowd was waiting for his toast. But the rhythm was gone. Every laugh sounded a little too sharp now. Every glass clinked a little too loud. He could still feel Maya behind him like a weight he could not shake. You all right? Trent asked under his breath as Caleb passed. Caleb gave him a look. I am fine. Trent did not believe him, and Caleb did not blame him. He stepped up to the microphone anyway, swallowed hard, and looked out over the guests gathered under the string lights and red, white, and blue lanterns. Happy Independence Day, everybody, he said, and a few people lifted their glasses. Tonight is about freedom, new beginnings, and moving forward. The words sounded good coming out, but even Caleb heard the hollowness in them. A woman near the front smiled politely. Someone else nodded. The crowd gave him enough support to finish the toast, but not enough to make him feel steady again. When he was done, the applause came and went quickly. It did not reach him. He stepped down and found Trent waiting with 2 fresh drinks. You are spiraling, Trent said. Caleb took the glass, but did not drink. I am not spiraling. You just froze the second your ex walked in. Caleb shot him a sharp look. She is not supposed to be here. Trent gave a small shrug. And yet, she is. That was exactly the problem. Caleb turned away before he could say something he would regret, scanning the crowd again. Maya was no longer standing by the glass lounge. She was across the rooftop now, speaking to a woman in a cream blazer and gold earrings, the kind of woman who looked like she had real power and knew it. The same man from before stood nearby, calm and watchful, but not in an obvious way. There was something about the whole scene that made Caleb uneasy in a way he could not name. He tried to tell himself he did not care. He tried to tell himself Maya was just making an appearance, maybe to prove a point, maybe to irritate him. But the more he watched, the less that made sense. She was not performing. She was not trying to be seen. People were simply noticing her. That was different. Very different. A waiter passed with a tray of cocktails, and Caleb grabbed one without thinking. He took a long sip, then noticed a few guests glancing in Maya's direction, whispering among themselves. He caught pieces of conversation. I did not know she was coming. She looks good. Who was she with? Caleb heard all of it, and none of it helped. It only made the irritation in his chest tighten into something uglier. He had spent the last few months telling himself the marriage had ended because it had to, that he had grown, that he had outgrown the life he had with Maya, that she had become part of an old version of himself he no longer needed. But tonight, looking at her from across the rooftop, he could not stop noticing how little she seemed to need him now. That thought irritated him more than he wanted to admit. He set the cocktail down untouched. She is doing this on purpose, he muttered. Trent raised an eyebrow. Doing what? This whole thing. Caleb nodded toward Maya. Showing up. Looking calm. Making me look like the idiot. Trent looked at him for a long second, then said, maybe you do not need her help with that. Caleb stared at him. Thanks. I'm just saying what everybody else is thinking. Caleb was about to fire back when Maya glanced in his direction again. No smile. No wave. Just a brief, level look that seemed to say, you are not the center of this story anymore. Then she turned back to her conversation, and Caleb felt something in him shift, small but real. He had expected anger, maybe a scene, maybe some desperate attempt to be noticed. What he got instead was silence. Controlled, measured silence. And somehow, that was worse. Because it told him Maya had not come here to fight for his attention. She had come here already knowing she did not need it. Caleb could not help himself. He waited until Trent drifted off toward the bar, then crossed the rooftop again, slower this time, trying to look casual even though he was paying attention to every word Maya said. She was still talking to the woman in the cream blazer, and now the man in the charcoal suit had joined them too, holding a slim leather portfolio under one arm. Caleb stopped a few feet away, just close enough to catch pieces of the conversation without making it obvious. The final approval went through this afternoon, the woman in the cream blazer was saying. We wanted to make sure everything was settled before tonight. Maya nodded once. Thank you. I did not want this to become a distraction. It is not a distraction, the man in the suit said. It is the reason half the room is going to be paying attention once we make the announcement. Caleb frowned. Announcement? He took one more step closer before he could stop himself. The woman in the blazer spotted him first and gave a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Mr. Sterling, she said, like she was greeting a man she had already learned not to trust. Good evening. Caleb forced a nod. Evening. Maya looked at him for a second, then returned to the others. That stung more than it should have. We are just waiting for the speech to finish, the man in the suit said. Then we will move forward with the formal introduction. Caleb could not keep the irritation out of his voice. Introduction to what? The woman in the blazer glanced at Maya, then back to him. You did not know? Caleb did not answer. That was answer enough. She gave him a small, almost pitying look before saying, Maya is the new director of the Whitfield Community Fund. Caleb blinked. The words did not land at first. The what? The fund, Maya said simply. It started after my aunt passed away. We have been expanding it for months. Caleb stared at her. His mind tried to catch up and failed. A fund. A real one. Not a hobby. Not some side thing. Something with money, structure, people, decisions. The kind of thing that mattered. You never mentioned that, he said, and hated how defensive he sounded. Maya's mouth curved, but only a little. You never asked what I was building after the divorce. That hit him in the chest harder than the fireworks had. The man in the suit opened the portfolio and handed Maya a page. She skimmed it, then signed without hesitation. Her hand did not shake. Her eyes did not flick toward Caleb. She looked like someone who had already made peace with the fact that he was no longer part of her life. We are announcing the first round of housing grants tonight, the woman in the blazer added. The board wanted the donor families here in person. Caleb looked between them, then back at Maya. You are serious. Completely, she said. And before you ask, no, I did not come to tell you. He swallowed. The rooftop suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too small. Around them, guests kept laughing and drinking and talking about fireworks, unaware that Caleb was standing in the middle of a conversation that had just turned his whole understanding upside down. Maya tucked the signed paper into the portfolio and finally met his eyes. Not with anger, not with revenge, just calm, steady truth. I know what you thought this night would be, she said quietly. I just did not come here to help you live inside that version anymore. Caleb had no answer for that. None at all. The first few seconds after Maya signed the final page were so quiet that Caleb could hear the ice settling in his glass. He stood there, staring at the portfolio in her hand, while the rooftop kept moving around him like nothing had changed. People were still laughing. Someone near the bar was still talking too loudly about the fireworks. A waitress moved past with a tray of champagne. But Caleb felt completely out of step with the room. Maya had just said the sentence that would not leave his head. I just did not come here to help you live inside that version anymore. He hated how calm she sounded. He hated even more that no one around them seemed to think this was a scene worth interrupting. The woman in the cream blazer took a step forward and smiled at Maya. We should be ready in about 10 minutes, she said. The donors are asking for the formal remarks. Maya gave a small nod. Perfect. Then, almost as an afterthought, she looked at Caleb. You might want to get back to your guests before they start wondering why you disappeared. Caleb let out a dry laugh. You are really enjoying this, are you? Maya did not answer right away. She just held his gaze for a second that felt way too long. No, she said finally. I am enjoying not shrinking anymore. That hit him harder than he expected. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was true. The man beside her, the one in the charcoal suit, closed the portfolio and turned slightly toward Caleb. Mr. Sterling, I would suggest you sit for the announcement, he said politely. It will be easier if everyone hears it at once. Caleb looked at him. Announcement about what? The woman in the cream blazer answered before Maya could. The Whitfield Community Fund is launching a new housing initiative tonight. The first grant cycle is already funded. Several local families are going to receive support immediately. Caleb frowned. Why is that a big deal right now? Maya blinked once, almost amused by his question. Because it is my project. Caleb went still. He had heard those words before, but he had not really let them land. Now they did. Her project. Her name. Her money. Her table. Her people. The rooftop suddenly felt smaller. He had spent the last hour acting like this was his night, his fresh start, his freedom. And here was Maya, standing in the same space, quietly attached to something far larger than his ego could hold. A guest nearby leaned toward another and whispered, That is Maya Whitfield? Caleb caught his own name in the next sentence, then saw a few heads turn in his direction. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make him aware of how exposed he was. Maya noticed too, but she did not flinch. I am not here to humiliate you, she said, her voice low enough that only he and the people nearest could hear. If that is what you are worried about. Caleb opened his mouth, then shut it again. Because yes, it was exactly what he was worried about. And that made him feel stupid. The woman in the blazer glanced at her watch. We should begin soon. Maya handed the portfolio to the man in the suit and took one slow breath. Like someone stepping into a room she had earned the right to enter. Then she looked back at Caleb one last time. You spent a long time thinking I was the quiet part of your life, she said. Tonight is just proof that you were wrong. And then she turned away from him, walking toward the center of the rooftop while Caleb stayed planted in place, watching her go, realizing with a slow, sinking certainty that he was no longer standing in the middle of the story. He was standing outside it. By the time Maya reached the center of the rooftop, the mood in the room had changed in a way Caleb could feel before he could explain it. People were not pretending to ignore her anymore. They were watching. Quietly, politely, but definitely watching. The woman in the cream blazer stepped up beside a small podium that had been set near the railing, and the man in the charcoal suit stood a few feet away with that same calm, steady look, as if he had already seen this moment play out in his head 100 times. Caleb stayed where he was, one hand on the side of a cocktail table, trying to act like he belonged to the conversation that had already moved past him. Good evening, everyone, the woman said into the microphone. Her voice carried cleanly over the rooftop, and the crowd started to settle. A few people turned fully toward the front. Others raised their phones a little higher, sensing something important was happening. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Maya stood beside the podium with both hands loosely folded in front of her, her face calm, her posture straight, not flashy, not stiff, just certain. That was the part that got under Caleb's skin the most. This was not performance. This was ownership. Thank you all for being here tonight, the woman continued. Before the fireworks start, we are proud to announce the launch of the Whitfield Community Fund's first housing grant program. Starting this month, families across the city will receive direct support for rent assistance, relocation help, and emergency housing needs. A low wave of murmurs moved through the crowd. Someone near the bar said, "That is huge." Another voice followed. "Wait, Maya Whitfield is behind this." Caleb looked around and realized people were not whispering about some random announcement anymore. They were connecting the dots. The same Maya he had spoken about like she was part of his old life was now standing in front of a room full of people with a real project, real money, and real respect. The woman at the microphone smiled toward Maya. "We would also like to recognize the person whose vision made this possible." Maya stepped forward. There was no dramatic pause. No smile meant to impress anybody. She just stood there, then spoke with the kind of voice that comes from living through something and refusing to let it define you forever. "A lot of people think starting over means losing everything," she said. "Sometimes it means finally seeing what you were building the whole time." The room went quiet. Caleb swallowed hard. He could hear himself breathing, which suddenly felt embarrassing. Maya continued, "I spent a long time trying to make a life work that asked me to stay smaller and quieter than I really was. Tonight is not about proving anything to one person. It is about showing up for the people who do not get to be heard enough." A few people nodded. Somebody actually started clapping before the speech was even over, and the sound spread through the crowd fast. Caleb saw it happen, saw the shift, saw the room tilt toward her. Not because she was asking for attention, because she had earned it. He turned his head and caught sight of Trent, who was looking at him with a face that said, "I told you this was not your night." Caleb hated that expression, but he could not argue with it. He looked back at Maya, and for a second the noise around them dropped away. She was not looking at him anymore. She was looking at the room as a whole, steady and grounded, exactly where she was supposed to be. Caleb suddenly understood something ugly and simple. Maya had not come to ruin his evening. She had come to live her life in front of him, without asking whether he could handle it. And he could feel, right there in front of all those people, that he could not. When the applause finally faded, Caleb was still standing in the same spot, holding a drink he had not touched for what felt like an hour. The rooftop buzzed with conversation again, but it was different now. Softer, warmer. People were talking about Maya, about the fund, about the housing grants, about how hard it must have been to build something like that while carrying everything else she had carried. Caleb heard his own name once or twice, but not in the way he wanted. There was no laughter in it anymore, just quiet comparison. The kind that makes a man realize the room has already moved on without him. Maya stepped away from the podium and accepted a few handshakes, a few compliments, a few genuine smiles from people who now saw her clearly. Then, for the first time that night, she looked back at Caleb. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with the kind of calm that comes after a long storm finally passes. Caleb started toward her before he could talk himself out of it. The guests around them kept talking. The fireworks kept cracking above the river, but everything in him had gone still. "Maya," he said, and for once he did not have anything clever to hide behind. She turned to face him fully. "You were right," he said quietly. "About all of it, I guess." Maya did not answer right away. She just studied him for a second, like she was deciding how much of this moment mattered. "I was not trying to be right," she said. "I was trying to move on." Caleb nodded, looking down at his glass. "I know." There was a long silence after that. Not cold, just honest. The kind that does not need to be filled because both people already understand more than they say. Caleb swallowed. "I thought I was leaving behind something that was holding me back." Maya held his gaze, steady and unreadable. A lot of people say that when they are really just leaving behind the part of themselves that knew how to care. The words landed cleanly. Caleb felt them in his chest, and for the first time all night, he did not try to defend himself. He did not try to explain away the months, the distance, the pride, the way he had made her feel small, and then called it a marriage that had simply run its course. None of that sounded like freedom now. It sounded like carelessness. Maya took a slow breath and glanced toward the crowd, where people were still celebrating her announcement. You do not have to hate yourself forever, she said. But you do have to be honest about what you did. Caleb gave a small, tired nod. I am starting to understand that. Good, Maya said, and there was no cruelty in it. Just truth. Then she looked past him toward the city lights, where the river reflected flashes of red and gold from the fireworks. Because life does not stop just because someone stops valuing you, she said. You keep going. You build. You learn who you are when nobody is clapping for you. Caleb stood there with that in his head, while the rooftop slowly filled with music again. Around him, the night kept moving. People kept laughing. Glasses kept being raised. The city kept shining like it had no idea how much had changed in one evening. And that was the part he would remember the longest. Not the embarrassment. Not the surprise. Not even the fact that he had been wrong. It was the sight of Maya standing in a room he once thought he had outgrown, and realizing she had never needed to beg her way back into it. She had simply become too strong to ignore. By the time the last fireworks broke over the river, Caleb finally understood that losing Maya had not made his life smaller because she had taken anything from him. It had made his life smaller because he had mistaken her quiet for weakness. And the truth was, the most dangerous mistake a man can make is confusing a woman's patience for permission. Maya was not his ex-wife standing in the past anymore. She was proof that peace can look stronger than revenge, and that sometimes the most powerful comeback is just a woman refusing to disappear.